Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to my full review of this, the Leisure Vintage Diver. Leisure are another one of these Phoenix brands, a brand that had long since died but has been resurrected thanks to the renewed interest in all things mechanical. Leisure was actually the brand name that Yema distributed watches across the United States under in the 1960s. Now before we go any further, this one was sent to me for free. I don't have to send it back. It wasn't actually sent to me by the company. It was sent to me by Fred AMOS. Perhaps some of you will be familiar with the name. Fred is the owner and operator of Bernhard Watches out of North Carolina in the States. He's also the official distributor of Leisure watches. I will leave links to his website and the Leisure Master website in the description of the video. These are currently on sale through Fred for $680 USD. So if you are keen to pick one up, that's a 20% discount off the regular price. Now would be a good time to do it. But just because I get a free watch doesn't mean to say the watch gets a free ride. I'm going to do 5 things I like and 5 things I don't like as much about this Leisure Vintage Diver. It is a fine line, a very fine line I think, between retro and kitsch, and this Leisure is standing on the line. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. Right, let me start by illustrating what I mean about Leisure being an alternative brand name for Yema in the 1960s. Here's a still from a Fratello Watches article from 2017 about a Leisure branded Yema Superman from 1963, reference 87062K. I'll leave a link to this article in the description of the video. And here's the modern Leisure, back to the vintage Yema / Leisure, back to the modern Leisure. You get the idea, it's essentially the same watch. This is a direct reboot of an older model. And indeed, if you have a look at the Yema website, they're about to start taking pre-orders for their version of the remake of the same watch, the 1963 Yema Superman. Anyway, this is essentially therefore a Yema design, a Leisure design from the 1960s. As you can see, it is almost unchanged. The indices, the hands, everything else is pretty much the same as it was. So I'm not questioning the authenticity of this watch today. Perhaps I'm just questioning the execution of it just a tiny little bit. So I'm going to start with dimensions and specs, and then I'm going to give you the 5 things I like and then the 5 things I don't like. And maybe you can tell me exactly which side of the kitsch retro line you think this one sits. So it's a classic 40mm, 20mm lug width. We've got 48mm lug to lug, just over 14.5mm thick, and on the supplied mesh strap, which is great, more on that later. This one weighs in at 135 grams, so there's certainly a bit of chunk to the watch. 307L stainless steel, case crown bezel and case back. Case back is screw on, as is the crown, screw down, 300 meters of water resistance. There is a pleasant little metric to imperial and vice versa conversion scale on the back of this one. We have double domed sapphire crystal, pleasantly domed, and a 120 click unidirectional rotating dive time bezel with a deep etched aluminium insert. Bezel action is okay if not outstanding. The indices are applied all round today. Lovely kind of trapezoidal shape, very 1960s. Leisure printed under the index at 12, vintage diver, automatic, 300 meters, and we are Swiss made here today. There's a frame around the date complication at the 3 o'clock. Handset's very pleasant as well. I do like that kind of lateral brushed effect that you get on these. Nice paddle second hand, and you won't be confused between the hour and minute given the differentiation between the two. There are minute markers around the outer edge, although those hour indexes are so large that there's only room for about 23 of them. Case finishing is all neat and tidy. Sign crown guards, but it's still got plenty of grip available. Nice fine brushing on the mid case and the lugs, and we've got a little chamfered edge smoothing the whole thing out. Coin edge bezel, easy to grip, aluminium insert, nice and deep etched here, all again neat and tidy. Now a Swiss made watch requires a Swiss made movement in the back of it, and indeed this Leisure has the ETA 2824. That's a 25 joule hacking and hand winding high beat 4 Hz automatic with bi-directional winding. Not the finest one I've seen, to be honest, running at plus 17, plus 18 per day, even if the amplitude is healthy. That is not going to be one of the 5 things that I don't like today, because that is within the stated tolerances that ETA allow these to leave the factory. And there you are, a quick wrist shot for you before I get into the 5 positives and 5 negatives. I've got a 7-inch wrist. This kind of 40-20 dimension is my preferred style, so this one wears well. 48 lug to lug, looking pretty good from where I'm standing. And the overhead shot, because it's a diver, no problems with legibility either. Those big indexes and those big hands certainly come into their own when you're viewing this watch from afar. Alright, 5 positives, 5 negatives, starting with the positives, starting with the first one, the packaging. There's a reason why I didn't show you the box earlier on, it's because I was saving it. The normal price on these Leisure vintage divers is 800 USD, and I think this is just about the right amount of box for 800 USD, proper wood with kind of rose gold embossed name in there. All looking nice. You get a nice little polishing cloth, a proper 2-year warranty, all soft and well done and very much suiting the overall vintage look of the watch. I think there is such a thing as too much packaging and too little packaging, and I'm going to show you an example of each now. This is the box that my O&W P101 came in, $1,150 US worth, and it's really just a small bit of cardboard. I would be upset if they hadn't put the money in the watch, but thankfully they had in this case. Whereas this whopper belongs to a Spinnaker Tissé Titanium that I just got in recently for review. $500 US worth, and I'm already worried about just how much money has been spent on the packaging and not on the watch. So with this ensemble, I think Leisure got it spot on. Positive number 2 then. I reckon there's a bit of value in this. I appreciate I'm talking about the discounted rate of $680 US, but at that price, I know there are plenty of other offerings from the Swatch Group and micro brands, for example, that offer you more for less. But its group of peers, if we look at its group of peers, Yema Superman, $1,099, admittedly with an in-house movement. Oris 65, they're certainly going to be north of $1,000, so this one under 700 USD, I don't think that's too bad when you think about it against its main competitors. Positive number 3, the lume. One of the kind of Achilles heels of these neo-retro divers is quite often the lume is as bad as it was in the 1960s. C3 Superluminova, reasonable amounts of it on the indices, and the hands. The hand application, very, very strong lume there. I'll speed it up, you can see what I mean. The indices die, but the hands just keep on going. And as long as the hands stay nice and bright through the night, you can still get a decent read on this one. Anecdotally for me, I had no problems reading this one anytime, day or night, so the lume is definitely a plus. The third positive is this mesh strap. Now it is a $40 add-on. If you're keen on one of these, it's a bit of a no-brainer. I highly recommend coughing up an extra 40 bucks for one of these. I'm normally a bracelet guy. Really, if you're gonna have a dive style watch, it should be on a metal bracelet. I think it should be capable of getting wet. This one is really, really well done and super comfortable. Nice, smooth, refined ends, quick release. You've got those little indents here, perhaps not infinitely adjustable therefore, but I had no problems getting a very comfortable fit. It's Leisure branded, very nice for $40. And my fifth and final positive, it is a faithful reproduction of a 1960s watch. I'll pop in that Fratello article again and back to the watch. So you can't accuse it of being inauthentic. It is pretty much a copy and paste of the design from the 1960s. Moving on to the negatives. My first negative is, it's pretty much a copy and paste of the design from the 1960s. Do you see what I did there? I wish they had made just a couple of changes. Well, really, just one change. I wish they had done something about the date window at 3 o'clock. Those beautiful trapezoidal indexes all the way around, and you've got this lumpy, square, awkwardly placed thing ruining the symmetry of the dial. Another one of my neo-retro favourites, the Oris 65. Look at what they did. They moved the date window down to 6 o'clock. This watch would look so much better, I think, if they had done that. If there was a big 3 here and they'd moved this one down to 6. And if we look at Yema's upcoming 1963 reissue, they've stuck with the date frame at 3 o'clock, but they have moved it far more in line with the other indices. It doesn't stick out like a sore thumb the way it does on the Leisure, I think. Second thing I'm not so keen on, it's a bit thick. This reminds me an awful lot of the Traska Freediver. I'll try and pop in some footage here. That is not a slight on the Traska Freediver, it's a great watch, but it's a great watch containing a Seiko NH35, which is a taller movement than the ETA 2824. Not quite sure how they couldn't have trimmed a mil off the back of this somewhere. It's a little bit chunky, perhaps a bit too chunky, given the overall 60s vibe when watches tended to be a bit slimmer and a bit more delicate. Complaint number 3, the mesh, as nice as it is, does take a bit of getting used to. Ideally, you're putting the watch down against a surface to feed this to the back. I mean, it's very neat here, but you gotta get used to it. Here we are, that's it clipped in nice and securely now. And if you're a nail biter, I highly recommend you stop. It's a disgusting habit, but if you're a nail biter, you're gonna be in trouble popping that one open. And more than a couple of times I have dropped this watch because, again, you probably need to have it resting on your leg or something else when you take the mesh off. Complaint number 4, I'm sure you're screaming at your mobile device or your computer right about now, the bezel. The bezel doesn't quite line up. It's either 2/3 of a click off to the right or 1/3 of a click off to the left. It doesn't sit straight. And if I tip the watch over, you can see that the bezel doesn't sit flat either. If I push it down here, there's a bit of bounce on the right hand side where my finger is. Not great overall. And my 5th and final complaint, which brings me neatly back in a circle to the point that I made in the intro, it's just a little bit kitschy perhaps. How come they have made a faithful reproduction of a 1960s watch but still managed to add a couple of touches which have it veering towards that end of the spectrum anyway? Vintage diver. Did they really need to print the words vintage diver on the dial? Surely anybody who purchases this watch does so in the full realization that they're purchasing a vintage diver. You don't see the Oris with vintage diver on the dial, or the Yema or the Leap or any of the other vintage style watches that are around at the moment. Why did they feel the need to do it with this one? And the colorways. That blue is maybe just a bit too bright. Even the plain one, the black dial one, still has that vintage diver script quite prominently in a bright blue colour. And then down in the bottom left, that is a full lume dial. Now, I love retro 60s divers, I love full lume dials, but I'm not sure that I love them together in the one watch. Do you see what I mean? There's just a few things that I think they could have done with just toning down a little bit. I think the watch would have been better for it overall if they had. But hey, this is just me. I am just one person with one person's opinions after all. What do you think? What do you think of this one when compared to the Yema? When compared to the Oris 65? Would you be tempted to pick one of these up given the price difference? Or do you feel like I do that maybe it's just a little bit inauthentic? They're trying to make it so hard to be authentic, but they haven't quite managed it. Leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. So there you have it, the Leisure Vintage Diver. Not a bad watch by any stretch, and certainly at the discounted price it offers pretty good value for money when you compare it to a Yema Superman or an Oris 65 for example. I just can't help but wish they had made a couple more tweaks on this one when they were modernising the design, moving the date wheel, making it just a bit thinner. And some of those colourways I think are on the border for me anyway. You might think differently. This might be just your cup of tea. Leave me a comment, let me know what you think about this one. I will see you in a future video, I have no doubt.